AI Limit is an upcoming anime Souls-like reminiscent of Code Vein. It places you in a civilization in the distant future that is on the verge of extinction. After a sudden collapse of the artificial ecosystem, natural disasters and wars soon followed. Centuries after these events, monsters emerged as a mysterious new substance called mud began to spread. You play as Arisa, a blader, who in typical Soulsborne fashion is an amnesiac that has been granted immortality. Although they appear as human, bladers are a new life form, which have been given immortality by the branches, which have been destroyed. Arisa has been tasked with finding and repairing these branches in the hopes of saving the civilization and getting her memory back. If that sounds interesting to you, let's go ahead and talk about the actual game itself. Combat is arguably the most important part in games like this, and a lot of Souls-likes try to just copy and paste the Soulsborne format without innovating or implementing new ideas, but that is not the case with AI Limit. It does enough, in my opinion, that it has its own identity. This game's most unique mechanic is the sync rate. This meter is multifunctional, acting as a mana bar and a damage mechanic. Sync rate is divided into 3 levels, and when your sync rate is at level 2 or higher, you get increased damage on your attacks, weapon skills, and your spells. Using weapon skills and spells requires using mud energy, which will decrease your sync rate. Getting hit and taking damage also results in a decrease in your sync rate, but you can regain sync by using certain consumables and landing attacks. So an aggressive playstyle feels pretty encouraged, which I'm a big fan of. Similar to games like Lies of P and Sekiro, Arisa also has a special arm with several abilities. The 4 shown off in the demo were a parry, which I'll talk about more later, a shield which builds energy when absorbing damage unless you blast that energy back when fully charged, a lightning dash, and a self-damaging damage boost. You can switch between these 4 at any point you want to while you're out and about and exploring, and just like weapon skills and spells, they decrease your sync rate when used. These seem like they are going to be a good way to encourage and cater to different playstyles, and in an ARPG, I feel like that's a pretty important thing to do. Seals are yet another mechanic they have, and the closest thing as a comparison I can think of are the Great Runes in Elden Ring. Each seal changes aspects of your character, such as giving you increased defense, more health, different resistances, etc. Final mechanic is the Nucleus. Nuclei are an equipped accessory which determines the amount of XP gained with killing enemies, sync rate boost, and the amount of XP you lose upon death. You don't fully lose XP on death, and you don't have to run back to pick it up, you just lose a certain percentage. I obtained the Void Nucleus after defeating the boss, and the description says that you can exchange rare crystal nuclei for special items at merchants. If I'm interpreting that right, it sounds like it's a wearable boss soul that can either give you certain bonuses, or you can exchange it for a weapon, armor, or etc. Moving on to spells, the demo had 7 of them to show off, and I'm assuming there'll be a lot more in the final version. The spells vary in utility and in use. There's one that's a partial heal, some coat your weapon with fire or electricity, and some let you summon a giant hammer made of lightning to slam your enemies. There are also quite a few weapons. They range from, your typical rusty pipe to dual drill arms. Each weapon had its own weapon art, and some of these are just so sick. I'll show a few off right here for a second. On to the actual combat. Overall, it felt good, although I do have some minor complaints. I'll start with the good first. Initially, one thing I wasn't sure of was the lack of a stamina bar. This seemed like an odd choice at first, but after playing for a while it started to make sense. Each weapon has a certain number of attacks in its moveset, and when the moveset is finished, there's a brief delay before you can start attacking again. So you're not just spamming R1 and swinging wildly forever. The way parrying is handled in this game is not how I expected it to be, and that's not a bad thing. The parrying is more along the lines of a traditional Dark Souls parry system than it is, say, Sekiro or Lies of P. Learning the parry timing was a bit difficult at first. Because of the startup of it, you don't hit parry right when an attack is about to hit. You hit parry before the attack is about to hit. After you learn the timings though, it's incredibly satisfying to hit, and the visceral attack is so badass. You can parry projectiles as well. So if you get good enough, you don't have to worry about long-ranged enemies sniping at you. Here is where one of my complaints about this is. Parrying seems super overpowered. When fighting the first boss, parrying just made it a joke. Every single move he has is parryable, so if you get the timing down, you can just stand in place, hit parry, follow up with a visceral, hit parry, visceral follow-up, and then just do that until he dies. While fun at first, if the boss designs continue to be on a similar route to this one, I think this could become a very boring gameplay loop after like 2 or 3 bosses. However, the challenge boss you unlock after beating the demo doesn't follow this format at all. In fact, this boss follows the same rules that the player does, which is a mechanic I am always a fan of. The Hunter of Blades has sync rate, and parrying doesn't automatically stagger her, but it depletes her sync rate. Only when you get the sync rate to 0 are you able to do a visceral. As for the actual boss fight itself, it's super well designed and a great mix of challenging and fun. I think the biggest problem that this game has with combat is that the dodging doesn't feel quite good enough yet. There are 2 types of dodges. There's a traditional standard dodge roll when you're not locked on, and that one feels just fine. When you're locked on, your dodge is more like a Bloodborne dash. This one feels pretty bad. The end lag just makes it feel super clunky, and dodging back to back, it feels like there's like a million years in between each dodge. If they just have the amount of end lag, I think it would feel 1,000,000% better. Backstabs are also another aspect of combat that I don't really like. You can only backstab enemies that aren't aggro to you and just aren't aware of your presence. So really the only purpose of the mechanic is to backstab enemies that are purposely placed on the map solely for the reason to be backstabbed. At that point, the mechanic just feels completely pointless to have. Big positive though is that the thrown consumables seem to actually be useful. You know, in the Dark Souls games, consumables like fire bombs are usually pretty bad. The throwing animation is slow, they don't do a whole lot of damage, and you have practically no range. It's just about the opposite in AI limit. They do decent damage, you throw them pretty quick, and Orisa can absolutely lob them. The sound effects need to get a little more love in general. A lot of things either don't seem right, or they don't seem beefy enough. The sounds of hitting enemies, or you getting hit, just feel like they're missing something. Like this boss move, it just doesn't feel right. There's giant flames, and there's not a big whooshy flame sound, if that makes sense. Also, the player character doesn't make noise when getting hit or dying, so it's just kind of awkwardly silent. On to map design, which is another important part. In the first level of the game, the team behind the game seems to understand that exploration of the map should be encouraged and rewarded. There were a couple of tucked away spots, and behind every spot was a new weapon or a piece of equipment. Not only that, but something I really liked that they did was at this part right here. There were 2 places you could go. You can go left and stay on the current floor, or you could drop down and see what awaits. I hope that this sort of level design continues to be present throughout the rest of the game. I'd say the game has a lot of potential, and I'm very much looking forward to its full release and just seeing what they do with it. What do you guys think though? Have you played the demo? Have you even heard of this game before? What are your opinions? Let me know in the comments and I'll catch you next time.